The story of King Arthur and his knights. Prologue. In ancient days there lived a very noble king named Uther Pendragon, and he became overlord of all of Britain. This king was very greatly aided unto the achievement of the Pendragonship of the realm by the help of two men, who rendered him great assistance in all that he did. One of these men was a certain very powerful enchanter and sometime prophet, known to men as Merlin the Wise, and he gave a very good counsel unto Uther Pendragon. The other man was an excellent noble and renowned knight, hight Ulfius, who was thought by many to be the greatest leader in war of any man then alive. And he gave Uther Pendragon aid and advice in battle. So, with the help of Merlin and Sir Ulfius, Uther Pendragon was able to overcome all of his enemies and to become king of the entire realm. After Uther Pendragon had ruled his kingdom for a number of years, he took to wife a certain beautiful and gentle lady, hight Igraine. This noble dame was the widow of Galois, the Duke of Tintagel, by which prince she had two daughters, one of whom was named Margaises and the other Morgana le Fay, and Morgana le Fay was a famous sorceress. These daughters the queen brought with her to the court of Uther Pendragon after she had married that puissant king, and there Margaises was wedded to King Urien of Gore, and Morgana le Fay was wedded to King Lot of Orkney. Now, after a while, Uther Pendragon and Queen Igraine had a son born of bone, and whilst the child still lay wrapped in his swaddling clothes and lying in a cradle of gold and ultramarine, Merlin came to Uther Pendragon with a spirit of prophecy strong upon him. For such was often the case with him, and, speaking in that spirit of prophecy, he said, Lord, it is given unto me to foresee that thou shalt shortly fall sick of a fever, and that thou shalt maybe die of a violent sweat that will follow thereon. Now, should such a dolorous thing befall us all, this young child, who is, certes, the hope of all this realm, will be in very great danger of his life. For many enemies will assuredly rise up with design to seize upon him for the sake of his inheritance, and either he will be slain, or else he will be held in captivity, from which he shall hardly hope to escape. Wherefore I do beseech thee, Lord, that thou wilt permit Sir Ulfius and myself to presently convey the child away until some place of safe refuge, where he may be hidden in secret until he groweth to manhood, and is able to guard himself from such dangers as may threaten him. When Merlin had made an end of speaking thus, Uther Pendragon made reply with a very steadfast countenance in his wise. Merlin, so far as my death is concerned, when my time cometh to die, I believe God will give me grace to meet my end with entire cheerfulness. For set as my lot is in that wise, no different from that of any other man who hath been born of woman. But touching the matter of this young child, if thy prophecy be true, then his danger is very great, and it would be well that he should be conveyed hence to some place of safe harbourage, as thou dost advise. Wherefore I pray thee to perform thy will in this affair, bearing in thy heart the consideration that the child is the most precious inheritance which I shall leave unto this land. All this, as was said, Uther Pendragon spake with great calmness and equanimity of spirit, and Merlin did as he had advised, and he and Sir Ulfius conveyed the child away by night, and no one but they wist whither the babe had been taken. And shortly afterwards Uther Pendragon was seized with the sickness as Merlin had foretold, and he died exactly as Merlin had feared that he would die, wherefore it was very well that the child had been taken to a place of safety. And after Uther Pendragon had departed from this life, it was likewise as Merlin had feared, for all the realm fell into great disorder, for each lesser king contended against his fellow for overlordship, and wicked knights and barons harried the highways as they listed, and there levied toll with great cruelty upon helpless wayfarers. For some such travellers they took prisoners and held for ransom, whilst others they slew because they had no ransom to pay. So it was a very common sight to see a dead man lying by the roadside, if you should venture to make a journey upon some business or other. Thus it befell that, after a while, all that dolorous land groaned with the trouble that lay upon it. Thus there passed nearly 18 years in such great affliction, and then one day the Archbishop of Canterbury summoned Merlin to him and bespake him in this wise. Merlin, men say that thou art the wisest man in all the world. Canst thou not find some means to heal the distractions of this woeful realm? Bend thou thy wisdom to this matter, and choose thou a king who shall be a fit overlord for us, so that we may enjoy happiness of life once more, as we did in the days of Uther Pendragon. Then Merlin lifted up his countenance upon the Archbishop, and spake in this wise: My lord, the spirit of prophecy that lieth upon me sometimes moveth me now to say that I do perceive that this country is soon to have a king, who shall be wiser and greater and more worthy of praise than was even Uther Pendragon. And he shall bring order and peace where is now disorder and war. Moreover, I may tell you that this king shall be of Uther Pendragon's own full blood royal. To this the Archbishop said, What thou tellest me, Merlin, is a wonderfully strange thing. But in this spirit of prophecy, canst thou not foretell when this king is to come? And canst thou tell how we shall know him when he appeareth amongst us? For many lesser kings there are who would fain be overlord of this land, and many such there are who deem themselves fit to rule over all the others. How can then shall we know the real king from those who may proclaim themselves to be the rightful king? My lord Archbishop, quoth Merlin, If I have thy leave for to exert my magic, I shall set an adventure, which, if any man achieve it, all the world shall straightway know that he is the rightful king and overlord of this realm. And to this the Archbishop said, Merlin, I bid thee do whatsoever they seem to thee to be right in this affair. And Merlin said, I will do so. So Merlin caused by magic that a huge marble stone, 4 square, should suddenly appear in an open place before the cathedral door. And upon this block of marble he caused it to be that there should stand an anvil, and into the anvil he caused it that there should be thrust a great naked sword midway deep of the blade. And this sword was the most wonderful that any man had ever seen, for the blade was of blue steel and extraordinarily bright and glistering, and the hilt was of gold, chased and carved with marvellous cunning, and inlaid with a great number of precious stones, so that it shone with wonderful brightness in the sunlight. And about the sword were written these words in letters of gold, Whoso pulleth out this sword from the anvil, that same is rightwise King born of England. So a great many people came and gazed upon that sword and marvelled at it exceedingly, for its like had never before been beheld upon the earth. Then, when Merlin had accomplished this miracle, and he bade the Archbishop to command that every man should make essay to draw out the sword, for that he who should succeed in drawing it forth out of the anvil should be rightwise King of England. So the Archbishop did according as Merlin said, and this was the marvel of the marble stone and the anvil, of which same any one may easily read for himself in that book written a very long while ago by Robert de Boron, which is called Le Roman de Merlin. Now, when the mandate of the Lord Archbishop went forth, summoning all the chief people of the land to the essay of that miracle, for indeed it was a miracle to draw forth a sword blade out of an anvil of solid iron, all the realm became immediately cast into a great ferment, so that each man asked his fellow, Who shall draw forth that sword, and who shall be our king? Some thought it would be King Lot, and others thought it would be King Urien of Gore, these being the sons-in-law unto Uther Pendragon. Some thought that it would be King Leodegrance of Cameliard, and others that it would be King Rience of North Wales. Some thought it would be this king, and others that it would be that king, for all the world was divided into different parties, who thought according to their liking. Then, as Christmas tide grew nigh, it presently appeared as though the entire world was wending its way to London town, for the highways and the byways became filled with wayfarers, kings and lords and knights and ladies and esquires and pages and men-at-arms, all betaking their way whither the essay was to be made of that adventure of the sword and the anvil. Every inn and castle was filled so full of travellers that it was a marvel how so many folk could be contained within their compass, and everywhere were tents and pavilions pitched along the wayside for the accommodation of those who could not find shelter within doors. But when the Archbishop beheld the multitudes that were assembling, he said to Merlin, Indeed, Merlin, it would be a very singular thing if among all these great kings and noble, honourable lords, we should not find someone worthy of being the king of this realm. Unto which the Merlin smiled and said, Marvel not, my lord, if among all those who appear to be so extraordinarily worthy, there shall not be found one who is worthy. And marvel not if, among all those who are unknown, there shall arise one who shall approve himself to be entirely worthy. And the Archbishop pondered Merlin's words, and so beginneth this story. Part 1. The Winning of Kinghood. Here beginneth the story of the sword, the anvil, and the marble stone, and of how that sword was first achieved by an unknown youth, until then of no renown, whether in arms or of estate. So hearken unto that which I have hereinafter written. Chapter 1st. How Sir Kay did combat in a great tournament at London town, and of how he brake his sword, likewise how Arthur found a new sword for him. It happened that among those worthies who were summoned into London town by the mandate of the Archbishop as above recounted, there was a certain knight, very honourable, and of high estate, by name Sir Ector of Bonmaison, surnamed the Trustworthy Knight because of the fidelity with which he kept the counsel of those who confided in him, and because he always performed unto all men, whether of high or low degree, that which he promised to undertake, without defalcation as to the same. So this noble and excellent knight was held in great regard by all those who knew him. For not only was he thus honourable in conduct, but he was, besides, of very high estate, being possessed of 7 castles in Wales, and in the adjoining country north thereof, and likewise of certain fruitful tracts of land with villages appertaining thereunto, and also of sundry forests of great extent, both in the north country and the west. This very noble knight had 2 sons. The elder of these was Sir Kay, a young knight of great valour and promise, and already well renowned in the courts of chivalry, because of several very honourable deeds of worthy achievement in arms which he had performed. The other was a young lad of 18 years of age, by name Arthur, who at that time was serving with good repute as Sir Kay's esquire at arms. Now when Sir Ector of Bonmaison received by messenger the mandate of the Archbishop, he immediately summoned these 2 sons unto him, and bade them to prepare straightway for to go with him to London town, and they did so. And in the same manner he bade a great number of retainers and esquires and pages for to make them ready, and they likewise did so. Thus, with a very considerable array at arms, and with great show of circumstance, Sir Ector of Bonmaison betook his way unto London town in obedience to the commands of the Archbishop. So when he had come thither, he took up his inn in a certain field, where many other noble knights and puissant lords had already established themselves, and there he set up a very fair pavilion of green silk, and erected his banner emblazoned with the device of his house, to wit, a griffin black upon a field of green. And upon this field were a great multitude of other pavilions of many different colours, and over above each pavilion was the pennant and the banner of that puissant lord to whom the pavilion belonged. Wherefore, because of the multitude of these pennants and banners, the sky was at places well nigh hidden with the gaudy colours of these fluttering flags. among the great lords who had come thither in pursuance to the Archbishop's summons, were many very famous kings and queens and noblemen of high degree. For there was King Lot of Orkney, who had taken to wife a stepdaughter of Uther Pendragon, and there was King Uriens of Gore, who had taken to wife another stepdaughter of that great king, and there was King Ban, and King Bors, and King Ryans, and King Leodegrance, and many others of like degree, for there were no less than 12 kings and 7 dukes, so that, what with their court of lords and ladies and esquires and pages and attendants, the town of London had hardly ever seen the like before that day. Now the Archbishop of Canterbury, having in mind the extraordinary state of that occasion that had brought so many kings and dukes and high lords unto the adventure of the sword and the anvil, had commanded that there should be a very stately and noble tournament proclaimed. Likewise, he commanded that this contest at arms should be held in a certain field nigh to the great cathedral, 3 days before that assay should be made of the sword and the anvil, which same was to be undertaken, as aforesaid, upon Christmas Day. To this tournament were bidden all knights who were of sufficient birth, condition, and quality for to fit them to take part therein. Accordingly, very many exalted knights made application for admission, and that in such numbers that 3 heralds were kept very busy looking into their pretensions. For these heralds examined the escutcheons and rolls of lineage of all applicants with great care and circumspection. Now, when Sir Kay received news of this tournament, he went to where his father was, and when he stood before his face, he spake in this wise: Sire, being thy son, and of such very high condition, both as to birth and estate, as I have inherited from thee, I find that I have an extraordinary desire to imperil my body in this tourney. Accordingly, if so be I may approve my quality as to knighthood before this college of heralds, it will maybe be to thy great honour and credit, and to the honour and credit of our house, if I should undertake this adventure. Wherefore I do crave thy leave to do as I have at mind. Unto these Sir Ector made reply: My son, thou hast my leave for to enter this honourable contest, and I do hope that God will give thee a great deal of strength, and likewise such grace of spirit that thou mayest achieve honour to thyself and credit to us who are of thy blood. So Sir Kay departed with very great joy, and immediately went to that congress of heralds, and submitted his pretensions unto them. And, after they had duly examined into his claims to knighthood, they entered his name as a knight contestant according to his desire, and at this Sir Kay was filled with great content and joy of heart. So, when his name had been enrolled upon the list of combatants, Sir Kay chose his young brother Arthur for to be his esquire at arms, and to carry his spear and pennant before him into the field of battle. And Arthur was also made exceedingly glad because of the honour that had befallen him and his brother. Now, the day having arrived when this tourney was to be held, a very huge concourse of people gathered together to witness that noble and courtly assault at arms. For at that time London was, as aforesaid, extraordinarily full of nobility and knighthood, wherefore it was reckoned that not less than 20,000 lords and ladies, besides those 12 kings and their courts and 7 dukes and their courts, were assembled in the lists circumadjacent to the field of battle, for to witness the performance of those chosen knights. And those noble people sat so close together, and so filled the seats and benches assigned to them, that it appeared as though an entirely solid wall of human souls surrounded that meadow where the battle was to be fought. And indeed, any knight might well be moved to do this uttermost upon such a great occasion, with the eyes of so many beautiful dames and noble lords gazing upon his performances. Wherefore the hearts of all the knights attendant were greatly expanded with emulation to overturn their enemies into the dust. In the centre of this wonderful court of lords and ladies, there was erected the stool and the throne of the Lord Archbishop himself. Above the throne was a canopy of purple cloth emblazoned with silver lilies, and the throne itself was hung all about with purple cloth of velvet, embroidered alternately with the figure of St. George in gold, and with silver crosses of St. George surrounded by the golden halos. Here the Lord Archbishop himself sat in great estate and pomp, being surrounded by a very exalted court of clerks of high degree, and also of knights of honourable estate, so that all the centre of the field glistened with the splendour of gold and silver embroidery, and was made beautiful by various colours of rich apparel, and bright with fine armour of excellent workmanship. And indeed, such was the stateliness of all these circumstances, that very few who were there had ever seen so noble a preparation for battle as that which they then beheld. Now, when all that great assembly were in their places, and everything had been prepared in due wise, a herald came and stood forth before the installed throne of the Archbishop, and blew a very strong, loud blast upon a trumpet. At that signal, the turnpikes of the lists were immediately opened, and two parties of knights contestant entered therein, the one party at the northern extremity of the meadow of battle, and the other party at the southern extremity thereof. Then immediately all that lone field was aglitter with the bright shining splendour of the sunlight upon polished armour and accoutrements. So these two parties took up their station, each at such a place as had been assigned unto them, the one to the north and the other to the south. Now the party with which Sir Kay had cast his lot was at the north of the field, and that company was 413 in number, and the other party stood at the south end of the field, and that company was 416 in number. But though the party with whom Sir Kay had attached himself numbered less by 3 than the other party, yet was it the stronger by some degree, because that there were a number of knights of great strength and renown in that company. Indeed, it may be here mentioned that 2 of those knights afterward became companions in very good credit of the Round Table, to wit, Sir Mador de la Porte and Sir Bedivere, which latter was the last who saw King Arthur alive upon this earth. So, when all was prepared according to the ordination of the tournament, and when those knights contestant had made themselves ready in all ways that were necessary, and when they had dressed their spears and their shields in such a manner as befitted knights about to enter serious battle, the herald set his trumpet to his lips a second time, and blew upon it with might and main. Then, having sounded this blast, he waited for a while, and then he blew upon the trumpet again. And upon that blast, each of those parties of knights quitted its station and rushed forth in great tumult against the other party, and that with such noise and fury that the whole earth groaned between the feet of the war horses, and trembled and shook as with an earthquake. So those two companies met, the one against the other, in the midst of the field, and the roar of breaking lances was so terrible that those who heard it were astonished and appalled at the sound. For several fair dames swooned away with terror of the noise, and others shrieked aloud, for not only was there that great uproar, but the air was altogether filled with the splinters of ash wood that flew about. In that famous assault 70 very noble and honourable knights were overthrown, many of them being trampled beneath the hoofs of the horses. Wherefore, when the two companies withdrew in the retreat, each to his station, the ground was beheld to be covered all over with broken fragments of lances and with cantles of armour. And many knights were seen to be woefully lying in the midst of all that wreck. And some of these champions strove to arise and could not, while others lay altogether quiet as though in death. To these ran divers esquires and pages in great numbers, and lifted up the fallen men and bare them away to places of safe harbourage. And likewise attendants ran and gathered up the cantles of armour and the broken spears, and bare them away to the barriers, so that by and by the field was altogether cleared once more. Then all those who gazed down upon that meadow gave loud acclaim with great joyousness of heart, for such a noble and glorious contest at arms in friendly assay had hardly ever been beheld in all that realm before. Now turn we unto Sir Kay, for in this assault he had conducted himself with such credit that no knight who was there had done better than he, and maybe no one had done so well as he. For though two opponents at once had directed their spears against him, yet he had successfully resisted their assault, and one of those two he smote so violently in the midst of his defences that he had lifted that assailant entirely over the crupper of the horse which he rode, and had flung him down to the distance of half a spear's length behind his steed, so that the fallen knight had rolled thrice over in the dust ere he ceased to fall. And when those of Sir Kay's party who were nigh to him beheld what he did, they gave him loud and vehement acclaim, and that in such measure that Sir Kay was wonderfully well satisfied and pleased at heart. And indeed it is to be said that at that time there was hardly any knight in all the world who was so excellent in deeds of arms as Sir Kay. And although there afterward came knights of much greater renown and more glorious achievement, as shall be hereinafter recorded in good season, yet at that time Sir Kay was reckoned by many to be one of the most wonderfully puissant knights, whether errant or in battle, in all of that realm. So was that course of the combat run to the great pleasure and satisfaction of all who beheld it, and more especially of Sir Kay and his friends. And after it had been completed, the two parties in array returned each to its assigned station once more. And when they had come there, each knight delivered up his spear unto his esquire, for the assault which was next to be made was to be undertaken with swords, wherefore all lances and other weapons were to be put away, such being the order of that courteous and gentle bout at arms. Accordingly, when the herald again blew upon his trumpet, each knight drew his weapon with such readiness for battle that there was a great splendour of blades all flashing in the air at once. And when the herald blew a second time, each party pushed forward to the contest with great nobleness of heart and eagerness of spirit, every knight being moved with intent to engage his opponent with all the might and main that lay in him. Then immediately began so fierce a battle that if those knights had been very enemies of long standing instead of friendly contestants, the blows which they delivered the one upon the other could not have been more vehement as to strength or more astonishing to gaze upon. And in this affair likewise Sir Kay approved himself to be so extraordinary a champion that his like was nowhere to be seen in all that field, for he violently smote down 5 knights, the one after the other, ere he was stayed in his advance. Wherefore, beholding him to be doing work of such a sort, several of the knights of the other party endeavoured to come at him with intent to meet him in his advance. Amongst these was a certain knight, hight Sir Balamorgineus, who was so huge of frame that he rode head and shoulders above any other knight, and he was possessed of such extraordinary strength that it was believed that he could successfully withstand the assault of 3 ordinary knights at one time. Wherefore, when this knight beheld the work that Sir Kay did, he cried out to him, "Ho, ho, Sir Knight of the Black Grafen, turn thou hitherward, and do battle with me." Now, when Sir Kay beheld Sir Balamorgineus to be minded to come against him in that wise, very threateningly and minded to do him battle, he turned him toward his enemy with great cheerfulness of spirit, for at that time Sir Kay was very full of youthful fire, and reckoned nothing of assaulting any enemy who might demand battle of him. So it was at that time, but it after befell, when he became seneschal, and when other and mightier knights appeared at the court of the king, that he would sometimes avoid an encounter with such a knight as Sir Lancelot, or Sir Pelleas, or Sir Meerhouse, or Sir Gawain, if he might do so with credit to his honour. So, being very full of the spirit of youth, he turned him with great lustiness of heart, altogether inflamed with the eagerness and fury of battle, and he cried out in a great voice, "Very well, I will do battle with thee, and I will cast thee down like thy fellows." And therewith he smote with wonderful fierceness at Sir Balamorgineus, and that with all his might. And Sir Balamorgineus received the stroke upon his helmet, and was altogether bewildered by the fury thereof, for he had never felt its like before that time. Wherefore his brains swam so light that it was necessary for him to hold to the horn of his saddle to save himself from falling. But it was a great pity for Sir Kay that, with the fierceness of the blow, his sword blade snapped short at the haft, flying so high in the air that it appeared to overtop the turrets of the cathedral in its flight. Yet so it happened, and thus it befell, that Sir Kay was left without any weapon. Yet it was thought that, because of that stroke, he had Sir Balamorgineus entirely at his mercy, and that if he could have struck another blow with his sword, he might easily have overcome him. But as it was, Sir Balamorgineus had presently so far recovered himself that he perceived his enemy to be altogether at his mercy. Wherefore, being filled beyond measure with rage because of the blow he had received, he pushed against Sir Kay with intent to smite him down in a violent assault. In this pass, it would maybe have gone very ill with Sir Kay, but that 3 of his companions in arms, perceiving the extreme peril in which he lay, thrust in betwixt him and Sir Balamorgineus with intent to take upon themselves the assault of that night and to save Sir Kay from overthrow. This they did with such success that Sir Kay was able to push out from the press and to escape to the barriers without suffering any further harm at the hands of his enemies. Now, when he reached the barrier, his esquire, young Arthur, came running to him with a goblet of spiced wine, and Sir Kay opened the umbril of his helmet for to drink, for he was athirst beyond measure. And lo, his face was all covered over with blood and sweat, and he was so adrought with battle that his tongue clave to the roof of his mouth, and he could not speak. But when he had drunk of the draught that Arthur gave him, his tongue was loosened, and he cried out to the young man in a loud and violent voice, "Ho, ho, brother, get me another sword for to do battle, for I am assuredly winning for our house much glory this day." And Arthur said, "Where shall I get thee a sword?" And Kay said, "Make haste unto our father's pavilion, and fetch me thence another sword, for this which I have is broken." And Arthur said, "I will do so with all speed." And thereupon he set hand to the barrier, and leapt over it into the alleyway beyond. And he ran down the alleyway with all the speed that he was able with intent to fulfill that task which his brother had bidden him to undertake. And with like speed he ran to that pavilion that his father had set up in the meadows. But when he came to the pavilion of Sir Ector, he found no one there, for all the attendants had betaken themselves into the tournament, and neither could he find any sword fit for his brother's handling. Wherefore he was put to a great pass to know what to do in that matter. In this extremity he bethought him of that sword that stood thrust into the anvil before the cathedral, and it appeared to him that such a sword as that would suit his brother's purposes very well. Wherefore he said to himself, "I will go thither and get that sword if I am able to do so, for it will assuredly do very well for my brother, for to finish his battle withal." Whereupon he ran with all speed to the cathedral, and when he had come there, he discovered that no one was there upon guard at the block of marble, as had heretofore been the case, for all who had been upon guard had betaken themselves unto the contest of arms that was toward, and the anvil and the sword stood where he could reach them. So, there being no one to stay young Arthur, he leapt up upon the block of marble, and laid his hands unto the hilt of the sword. And he bent his body, and drew upon the sword very strongly, and lo, it came forth from the anvil with wonderful smoothness and ease, and he held the sword in his hand, and it was his. And when he got the sword in that way, he wrapped it in his cloak so that no one might see it, for it shone with an exceeding brightness and splendour. And he leapt down from the block of marble stone, and hastened with it unto the field of battle. Now when Arthur had entered into that meadow once more, he found Sir Kay awaiting his coming with great impatience of spirit. And when Sir Kay saw him, he cried out very vehemently, "Hast thou got a sword?" And Arthur said, "Yes, I have one here." Thereupon he opened his cloak and showed Sir Kay what sword it was he had brought. Now when Sir Kay beheld the sword, he immediately knew it, and he wist not what to think or what to say, wherefore he stood for a while like one turned into a stone, looking upon that sword. Then in a while he said, in a very strange voice, Where got ye that sword? And Arthur looked upon his brother, and he beheld that his countenance was greatly disturbed, and that his face was altogether as white as wax. And he said, Brother, what ails thee that thou lookest so strangely? I will tell the entire truth. I could find no sword in our father's pavilion. Wherefore I bethought me of that sword that stood in the anvil upon the marble cube before the cathedral. So I went thither, and made essay for to draw it forth, and it came forth with wonderful ease. So when I had drawn it out, I wrapped it in my cloak, and brought it hither unto thee, as thou beholdest. Then Sir Kay turned his thoughts inward, and communed with himself in this wise. Lo, my brother Arthur is as yet hardly more than a child, and he is moreover exceedingly innocent. Therefore he knoweth not what he hath done in this, nor what the doing thereof signifieth. Now, since he hath achieved this weapon, why should I not myself lay claim to that achievement, and so obtain the glory which it signifieth? Whereupon he presently aroused himself and said to Arthur, Give the sword and the cloak to me. And Arthur did as his brother commanded. And when he had done so, Sir Kay said to him, Tell no man of this, but keep it privy in thine own heart. Meantime, go thou to our father where he sits at the lists, and bid come straight away unto the pavilion where we have taken up our inn. And Arthur did as Sir Kay commanded him, greatly possessed with wonder that his brother should be so disturbed in spirit as he had appeared to be. For he wist not what he had done in drawing out that sword from the anvil, nor did he know of what great things should arise from that little thing. For so it is in this world, that a man sometimes approves himself to be worthy of such a great trust as that, and yet, in loneliness of spirit, he is yet altogether unaware that he is worthy thereof. And so it was with young Arthur at that time. And so here endeth chapter first. If you enjoyed this, please like, comment and subscribe, and watch out for the next chapter second.